Hayden Panettiere is dead at just 36 years old. The actress who millions of people grew up watching on Heroes. Nashville and the Scream franchise has suddenly been taken from the world, and the circumstances surrounding her death are still being investigated. But what makes this story even more disturbing is what Hayden had been doing in the months before her death. After years of struggling with addiction, depression, abusive relationships, and the pressures of growing up in Hollywood, Hayden had finally started telling her story in her own words. And some of the things she revealed were incredibly difficult to hear. Hayden was found unresponsive at a residence in Greenville, South Carolina, on Sunday, August 16, 2026, according to reports. A friend called 911 at around 1:51 in the afternoon after finding her unresponsive. Emergency responders arrived and attempted to save her, but Hayden was pronounced dead at approximately 2:32 p.m. Dispatch audio reportedly referred to cardiac arrest and a possible overdose. But this is extremely important. Hayden's official cause and manner of death have not yet been determined. The coroner has completed an autopsy and reported that there were no signs of trauma contributing to her death. Police have also said there is currently no indication of foul play. So right now we do not know exactly how Hayden died. We don't know whether the mention of an overdose in the emergency dispatch ultimately becomes part of the official cause of death. And we certainly do not have evidence that somebody murdered her. Those are important facts to remember because social media is already filling in the blanks with theories. But tonight I want to look at something that we do know. Hayden had spent the final months of her life opening up about the things she had experienced behind the Hollywood smile. Hayden Panettiere had been in front of cameras for almost her entire life. She began working as a child and eventually became one of the most recognizable young actresses of her generation. She became a household name when she played Claire Bennett on Heroes, before taking on the role of Juliet Barnes on Nashville and later returning as Kirby Reed in the Scream franchise. To the outside world, she had everything: fame, beauty, money, and a career that millions of aspiring actors could only dream about. But behind that image, Hayden was struggling in ways that the public didn't fully understand. Earlier this year, Hayden released her memoir, This Is Me, A Reckoning. And the timing is heartbreaking when you look at it now. The book was published in May 2026, just 3 months before her death. In it, Hayden opened up about addiction, depression, motherhood, childhood fame, relationships, abuse, and some deeply disturbing experiences she said she encountered while growing up around the entertainment industry. One of the biggest themes running through Hayden's story was that she learned very young to trust the adults around her. As a child actor, she depended on managers, representatives, and other adults to tell her what to do, where to go, and how to behave. Hayden later reflected on how that affected her ability to trust her own instincts. She described herself as somebody who had become used to following instructions from people she respected. If they told her to jump, she jumped. If they told her to wear something, she wore it. And she said she had learned to trust other people more than she trusted herself. That is particularly disturbing when you hear about some of the experiences she later described. Hayden revealed that she had been introduced to pills at a young age by somebody she trusted. She described being given what she understood to be a pill before a red carpet event, with the idea that it would help her feel more confident. According to Hayden, she trusted the person who gave it to her because she already had a close relationship with them. She said that experience eventually contributed to her developing a relationship with substances that would become incredibly difficult to escape. And then there was the story from when Hayden was around 18 years old that shocked many people when she revealed it in her memoir. Hayden described being on a celebrity-filled yacht in the south of France. According to her account, a woman she trusted took her downstairs to a private room. Inside, Hayden encountered a famous British singer-songwriter who was naked in a bed. Hayden said the woman encouraged her to get into bed with him. She described being confused and frightened, and ultimately refusing to allow the situation to continue. She managed to get away from the room. Hayden did not publicly name the man. She described him as a famous British singer-songwriter who was in his 30s at the time. Since the story became public, people online have tried to identify who they believe she was talking about. But speculation is not proof. and Hayden herself did not publicly name him. So we should not present any internet theory as established fact. What matters is Hayden's account of what she says happened to her. What makes that story particularly disturbing is that Hayden said the person who took her into that room was somebody she trusted. She had viewed this person as a protector and somebody who cared about her. According to Hayden, she suddenly realized that the person she trusted had placed her in an extremely vulnerable situation. She described feeling as though she had been betrayed and exploited. And this is where Hayden's story moves beyond the usual Hollywood gossip. She wasn't simply talking about a bad party or an uncomfortable encounter. She was describing what she believed was exploitation. She was describing being a young woman surrounded by powerful people and being placed into situations where she didn't necessarily understand what was expected of her until she was already there. Hayden also spoke about the culture surrounding young actors and how easily boundaries can become blurred. When you're famous as a child, the adults around you can become your entire world. They manage your career, arrange your work, tell you where you're supposed to be, and often make decisions that would normally be made by a parent. Hayden's story raises uncomfortable questions about what happens when that trust is abused. And then came Nashville. For millions of people, Nashville was simply a hugely successful television series. Hayden played Juliet Barnes, a talented singer who struggled with addiction, relationships, motherhood, and mental health. But for Hayden, the character became far too close to her own reality. Hayden was dealing with addiction and depression in her personal life while playing a fictional character who was going through many of the same struggles on screen. She later explained that filming Nashville could feel like she was living through her trauma twice. She was Hayden when the cameras weren't rolling, and then she was playing a character who was experiencing many of the same emotional problems when the cameras started rolling. Imagine having to perform your own pain for millions of people while you're still trying to survive it privately. Hayden later described the experience as extremely difficult. The character was supposed to be fictional, but the lines between Juliet's life and Hayden's life became increasingly blurred. She was experiencing addiction, depression, and problems in her relationships. And then she would arrive at work and be expected to portray those same kinds of experiences on screen. That doesn't mean Nashville caused Hayden's problems. Her struggles were much bigger and much more complicated than one television show. But according to Hayden, the experience of repeatedly acting out those themes, while she was personally struggling, was incredibly painful. And then there was motherhood. In 2014. Hayden gave birth to her daughter Kaya with former professional boxer Vladimir Klitschko. But after giving birth, Hayden experienced severe postpartum depression. She later spoke openly about how difficult that period of her life became and how she began relying on alcohol and other substances while trying to cope. Her daughter was incredibly important to her. But Hayden reached a point where she knew she wasn't well enough to provide the stability she believed Kaya needed. Eventually, Hayden signed over full custody of Kaya to Vladimir Klitschko. That decision has been misunderstood and criticized by people who didn't know what was happening behind closed doors. But Hayden later explained that giving up custody wasn't because she didn't love her daughter. She believed that Kaya would be safer and better supported with her father while Hayden concentrated on getting herself well. And according to Hayden, it was one of the most painful decisions she had ever made. She still wanted to be her daughter's mother. She still loved her. She still wanted a relationship with her. But Hayden recognized that loving your child and being healthy enough to raise them are not always the same thing. In her memoir, she explained that she could have fought the custody decision, but ultimately she believed she had to put Kaya's well-being before her own desire to keep custody. And that is something I think is important to understand. Hayden wasn't saying she didn't want her daughter. She was saying she was too unwell at that point in her life and believed her daughter deserved stability. But while Hayden was trying to recover, another destructive relationship entered her life. Hayden became involved with Brian Hickerson, and their relationship eventually became extremely troubled. Hickerson was arrested in connection with domestic violence allegations involving Hayden, and he later served jail time after pleading no contest to a felony domestic violence charge involving her. Hayden eventually spoke publicly about the abuse and said that she wanted to tell the truth because she hoped her story could help other people trapped in harmful relationships. And this became another recurring pattern in Hayden's life. She would experience something incredibly painful. She would disappear from the public eye. The headlines would speculate about what was happening. And eventually, she would come back and try to explain what had really been happening behind the scenes. But perhaps one of the saddest chapters came in 2023, when Hayden lost her younger brother, Hayden Panettiere, at just 28 years old. His death devastated her. Hayden had also been an actor, and the two siblings had grown up in the entertainment industry together. Hayden later spoke about the enormous impact his death had on her. She was already carrying years of trauma, addiction, and grief, and then she lost someone who had been part of her life from the beginning. By 2026, Hayden seemed determined to tell her story. And that's why the memoir matters so much. This wasn't a tabloid article written about Hayden. This wasn't a paparazzi photograph. This wasn't an anonymous source claiming something had happened. These were Hayden's own experiences as she chose to describe them. She talked about addiction. She talked about depression. She talked about postpartum depression. She talked about losing custody of her daughter. She talked about abusive relationships. She talked about the pressures of growing up famous. And she talked about disturbing experiences involving people she had trusted in Hollywood. She was finally taking control of the narrative. And then, on August 16th, everything changed. Hayden Panettiere was dead. She was only 36 years old. The woman who had spent years fighting addiction and trying to rebuild. Her life had suddenly disappeared from it. And because the circumstances of her death are still being investigated, people are understandably asking questions. Was the reported overdose connected to her history of addiction? Was there another medical explanation? Was something else happening that we don't yet know about? At this moment, we simply don't know. The official cause and manner of death remain undetermined, and authorities have said there are no current indications of foul play. That means we have to be extremely careful about what we say next. There is no evidence at this time that Hayden was murdered because she spoke about Hollywood. There is no evidence that somebody silenced her. There is no evidence connecting her death to the people she discussed in her memoir. Those claims are circulating online, but they remain speculation. However, there is something that is undeniably haunting. Hayden had spent years keeping parts of her life private. Then, only months before her death, she decided to tell the world what she said had happened to her. She was finally speaking openly about the darkness behind the fame, and now she's gone. Maybe that's why so many people are struggling to process this, because Hayden wasn't simply another celebrity who died young. She was somebody who had spent years trying to survive. She had survived childhood fame. She had survived addiction. She had survived postpartum depression. She had survived the loss of custody of her daughter. She had survived an abusive relationship. She had survived the death of her brother, and she had finally reached a point where she seemed determined to tell her story. Her memoir was called "This Is Me, a Reckoning." And those words now feel incredibly powerful, because after years of being told what to say, what to wear, how to behave, and how to present herself to the public, Hayden finally got to say, "This is me. This is what happened to me. This is what I survived. And this is what I want you to know." Whether you believe every part of her story or not, one thing cannot be disputed. Hayden was carrying enormous pain, and she was trying to make sense of it. Her death doesn't erase that story, and it shouldn't turn her into a conspiracy either. We need to allow the investigation to continue. We need to wait for the official cause of death, and we need to resist the temptation to turn rumors into facts simply because the circumstances are shocking. But we can still ask questions. Why do so many former child stars talk about losing control of their own lives? Why are young performers placed into environments where adults have so much power over them? Why did Hayden feel she had to learn to trust other people more than herself? And perhaps the biggest question of all is this: how much of Hayden Panettiere's suffering could the public have understood if we had listened to her before it was too late? Because Hayden spent years being watched. We watched her on television. We watched her relationships. We watched her struggles. We watched the headlines. But maybe we didn't really listen until she finally wrote it all down. And now, tragically, her story is being read by millions of people who will never get the chance to ask her what she really meant. Hayden Panettiere was a child star who became a Hollywood star, a mother, an actress, a singer, a survivor, and eventually an author trying to reclaim her own story. Her life was complicated. It was painful. There were mistakes. There were things she struggled with. But there were also things she said happened to her that were completely outside her control. And perhaps that's the part of Hayden's story we should remember. Not simply the headlines about addiction. Not simply the photographs of a troubled actress. Not simply the speculation surrounding her death, but the woman underneath all of it. A woman who was trying to heal. A woman who loved her daughter. A woman who experienced unimaginable grief. And a woman who, in the final months of her life, finally found the courage to tell the world what she said she had been through. We still don't know exactly how Hayden Panettiere died. That answer will hopefully come from the investigation. But we do know how she wanted to be remembered. Not as a perfect person, not as a Hollywood stereotype, but as Hayden. Someone who had been through hell and was still trying to find her way out. And perhaps the most heartbreaking question we can ask now is this. If Hayden Panettiere had spent her entire life being watched by Hollywood, why did it take her death for so many people to finally listen to what she was trying to say? Rest in peace, Hayden.